Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theater Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer, cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. He joins us weekly. The films A Quiet Place Part 2, The Killing of Two Lovers, and The Amusement Park. Well, this is all very intriguing.
Well, let's hope it continues to be intriguing. As you pointed out just before we started, in our private conversation, two of these films have the word two in them, in their titles. I only wish I could have come up with a third one, but them's the breaks. So our third one will mark a very different phase in today's episode for more than one reason. But let's begin with A Quiet Place Part 2. This is a movie which is, by the way, written and directed by John Krasinski, who is best known to everybody, including me, for playing the ever-lovable character named Jim on The Office on TV. He became a filmmaker not all that long ago with a movie called A Quiet Place, and now he has made the sequel, A Quiet Place Part 2. And interestingly, A Quiet Place Part 2 has been all finished and ready to go for something like a year, but it was delayed because of the COVID pandemic, and apparently Krasinski and company really wanted this thing to get released in movie theaters. They felt it has to be seen on the big screen. Didn't want people to be seeing it streaming. Now, right now, it is just in movie theaters. Before too long, it will also be streaming, a few weeks. And personally, as somebody who went out and saw it in a movie theater with a nice big screen and a few other people there and all of that, I don't think it's going to lose very much if you watch it on a small screen, as long as you don't get interrupted a whole lot. And the reason for that is that I find A Quiet Place Part 2, like the first film, like A Quiet Place, which, by the way, came out about 3 years ago, to be basically just sort of a very standard issue horror movie. I don't see much in it that's original. I don't see much in it that's interesting. It is a perfectly effective sort of jump scare movie. So if you want to see it with a bunch of people and have a good time being scared in extremely predictable ways, then by all means go to see it. It did not do much for me. I like horror movies. It's a genre I've always been fond of, but I can't say I found much of interest in A Quiet Place Part 2. So anyway, to start with a word, just a reminder, or maybe some people are not familiar with A Quiet Place. Basically, we have a situation. We have a family who is living in a world that is totally menaced by these monsters who have come in from somewhere. They are horrible, evil, ugly monsters, and all they want to do is kill human beings. Fortunately for human beings, these monsters have a lot of problems. For example, they can't see anything. However, they hear extremely well. And so the idea is, that's why both of these movies are called A Quiet Place. You have to be really, really careful not to make any noise, because if you make even a little bit of noise, then these horrible monsters are going to hear you, and they're going to jump on you, and they're going to gobble you up. So that's the setup for both of these movies. Now, in the first movie, John Krasinski was not only the director, he was the star. Unfortunately, he did not survive the ending of the first movie to save his family. He had to die. So he's not he's in the sequel at the very beginning, which is kind of a flashback to before all these horrors started. And then once we get into the present day of the movie, John Krasinski is no longer there, which is too bad, because he's an appealing actor. I rather like him. But the rest of the family is there. His wife, played by Emily Blunt, or now his widow, their teenage daughter, played by Millicent Simmons, and she is deaf, and that's very important. And interestingly, for this movie called A Quiet Place, one of the main characters is deaf. And then their younger son, teenage son, played by Noah Jupe. And then there's a baby. It was kind of interesting when the baby got born in the first movie, because you can't really say to a little newborn baby, keep quiet. Don't cry now. The monsters might hear you and gobble you up. Babies cry. So that, brought some additional suspense into the first installment once the baby was born. The baby is still pretty young in this movie, and there are various problems that arise around the baby. Interestingly, too, the deaf daughter does have a cochlear implant, and this ends up playing an important role in the family's ability to withstand the horrible monsters. So that's what's going on in this movie. Everybody has to be very quiet, although sometimes people can't all be very quiet. And the horrible monsters are always out there, and they're always ready to come get you, and that's what it's all about. So again, the great movie critic Molly Haskell once said years ago about the movie Jaws that, of course, it made her jump every once in a while, but sitting in the dentist chair, that happens to her as well. These things that suddenly come when you don't expect them and give you a jolt. And I kind of felt that way when I was watching A Quiet Place Part 2. It's very nicely directed. The special effects are good and all of that. But, I just found it so predictable. So again, if you want to see a movie that is just sort of fun to see with a bunch of people, and every once in a while there's a big scare that goes, boo, and it sort of makes you leap out of your skin just a tiny little bit, then, you'll have a good time at A Quiet Place Part 2. Again, I prefer horror movies with a little bit of originality to them. And not only is this movie not original in the way it scares you, again, it's just these sort of jolt scares, but it's not even original in subject matter because we already had this in Part 1, and this is basically a continuation. The movie really sets one up for a sequel. So I am sure that before too many months or perhaps years have passed, we will be talking about A Quiet Place Part 3, but let us now rest things in silence for the time being. That's enough about A Quiet Place Part 2. All three of our movies today, Jill, are pretty dark. So our second movie, The Killing of Two Lovers, is very dark. It was written and directed by one Robert Mashoyan, and I think it is just an incredibly good movie. And it's good because it's obviously made on a really low budget. It has a very, very small cast, and it deals with very, very intense relations among a very small number of people. But within those parameters, it is just beautifully done. It is amazingly just as a work of cinematic craft. It's beautifully done. And by that, I don't mean anything fancy, the opposite of that, but just really, really intense drama. That's what it's all about. So here is the setup. We have a man and his wife. I shouldn't put it that way. I should say a husband and wife, or a woman and her husband. They're not getting along. And they've separated, and he is living with his father now for the moment, and doesn't really they get along just fine, but it's kind of annoying when you're a grown-up and you move back in with your father. And the husband and wife, now separated, are trying to work things out. As she says in an early scene to him, we still love each other. We just want to figure this out and maybe get back together, but we want to do things right, and that kind of thing. They've got kids. They've got a teenage daughter and then a couple of younger boys, and that brings some complication into their lives. And what really brings complication into their lives is when the husband realizes that the wife has been seeing another man, and this has their teenage daughter very, very, very upset. She's really jealous and doesn't like the situation and wishes that her father would stand up to the mother and do something about this. And he's saying he would like to. But anyway, it's that sort of thing. It's very much a family drama, even a family melodrama, with the husband and the wife separated. The wife is now seeing somebody else. The teenage daughter is very upset about this. The little kids are sort of clueless about this, and that's what the movie is about. Now, what makes all of this extraordinarily effective is, two things. First of all, the unbelievably good, maybe not unbelievably good, but the refreshingly good acting. Clayne Crawford plays the husband. Sapita Moafi plays the wife. Their names are David and Nikki. And they both give absolutely excellent performances. And I also want to mention Avery Pizzuto, who plays the daughter, the teenage daughter, also excellent. And then the little kids are really well played by little kids. So the acting is really, really, really first rate. They just inhabit these characters. They make the characters really real. And of course, the dialogue by the filmmaker, Robert Mashoyan, really, really contributes to that. Everything in this movie seems harrowingly real. These people seem like real people, and what they're going through seem like real crises and real emotions, and you just feel it all really, really a lot. Number two, that makes this movie so amazingly effective is the way it is shot. It is shot mostly in very long takes, which simply means that the camera keeps filming, moving around when need be, without cutting to new shots very often. So we have shots that last a long time on the screen, sometimes remarkably long times. And this is the opposite of where American movies, certainly, and most overseas movies as well, have been going in recent years. Cutting has been getting faster and faster and faster. What film scholars call the average shot length has been getting faster and faster. This is all because of people like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. The cut, cut, cut. Always got to give the audience something to look at every few seconds, every couple of seconds, every half a second. Okay, this movie does the opposite of that. And that has a very real effect in terms of when you're watching the movie, how you feel about it. Because the characters can develop emotions in the moment as time passes, and the actors can develop their performances and their relationships with one another as the shot continues. Sometimes it's almost boring. People often have conversations when they're sitting in cars and the car or truck is speeding down the road and the camera's just going on and on. But while the camera work may not be that interesting, the performances are really intense and really develop more and more intensity because of the way there's no constant cutting to another shot. And I was just really impressed, not only by the decision to make the movie this way, because it goes very much against current tendencies in the movie, but because it's so really, really well done. It's just an amazingly well-acted, well-directed movie. Again, a very low-budget movie, not the kind of movie that certainly is going to have big ads in your local newspaper. You got to sort of seek it out. And by the way, the movie is not as bleak as the title sounds, The Killing of Two Lovers, but it's still very dark. So be prepared for an experience about real people going through really difficult emotional times. And the movie transmits a lot of that to the audience as you watch. But I found it very, very effective. I really got inside the minds of these main characters, and I really started to feel how they felt. And it was just a very, very dramatic experience, a remarkable movie. And I truly think that the director, Robert Mashoyan, has a really bright future. I'm sure we'll be hearing from him much more in the future. Our final movie today, Jill, The Amusement Park, is an oddity. And it's an oddity in the final way. It's a movie that was made way back in 1973, and it's only now being released for the first time. It was restored to something like its original condition. I mean, it still looks pretty crummy, but I guess its original condition looked pretty crummy. It's an extremely no-budget movie. But it was made by somebody who was really, really famous, especially if you like horror movies. It was made by George A. Romero. George Romero burst on the scene back in 1968 with what remains a total classic of horror film and, in fact, of B-movies and indie movies generally, Night of the Living Dead. It's an astoundingly great horror movie. It started the whole modern zombie movie craze that continues to go strong, and it's just, again, a totally precedent-setting movie, Night of the Living Dead. Now, George Romero made many, many movies after that, before his death a few years ago. A number of them were sequels or sort of redos of Night of the Living Dead. He never quite managed to break out of that filmmaker typecasting of being associated with horror movies, and in fact with one particular kind of horror movie. And he made this trilogy. There was Night of the Living Dead, then there was Dawn of the Dead, then there was The Day of the Dead, and in my opinion, none of the sequels came anywhere near the original one. But way back in the 70s, after Night of the Living Dead had made him famous as a B filmmaker, the Lutheran Foundation hired him to make a movie that would increase public awareness of the plight of the aged in American society. So, okay, that's like a public service announcement, and George Romero set about making a movie. It's a little under an hour long, called The Amusement Park. And it's basically about an old man who finds himself in an amusement park, and it is a nightmare of an amusement park because everything in it is like a heightened parody and nightmare caricature of what happens to old people in America. So there is sickness, there is infirmity, and above all, there is not caring. There is not care for these people. There is not care for their plight. There is not sympathy. There is not empathy. It's just a great big amusement park where all kinds of spectacular things are happening all around you. But if you are old and infirm, as many of the people in this amusement park are, the situation is a nightmare for you. And there are young people around. There are even children around. But none of them give any help to the older people. And that's what the movie is about. So I'm a senior citizen myself. I found all this quite remarkable to watch. And I thought, yes, people should should pay more attention and have more care for people like me. But the amusement park was shelved by the Lutheran Foundation. When they took one look at it, they said, my gosh, this is a horror movie. We can't release this. This isn't going to help the plight of old people. So the movie never got shown until now. It's a curiosity. It's an oddity. It's kind of a morbid curiosity and oddity, acted, by the way, almost entirely by non-professional performers. So the acting's not great or anything like that. But as an oddity, and if you're interested in horror movies, and if you're interested in movies of the 70s, and if you're interested in George A. Romero, then it's something absolutely to catch up with. Right now, it's streaming for free on the horror streaming service Shudder, and I totally recommend it if you want to see a real curiosity of a very dark kind. So that is my pretty darn dark story this week, Jill.
For which we thank you, David Sterritt. Films in Focus, The Films, A Quiet Place Part 2, The Killing of Two Lovers, and The Amusement Park.